Hello. We are delighted to have this opportunity today to present about the development and evaluation of an active learning tool for data decision-making. I'm joined by Clara Yebo Llorente and Hui Zhang, the primary authors of this paper. We will discuss the reason for the creation of what we call the Data Sharing Wizard tool. Following a brief demonstration of the tool, we will discuss a usability study that we created and our analysis of the results of that study. As we know, research data are increasingly gathered and processed digitally in more easily shareable formats. The goal of sharing and building on existing data for reuse has gained momentum over the last decade, particularly in the sciences. Research libraries and librarians, historically interested in the broadest possible access to and distribution of all forms of information and research, increasingly work closely with researchers to help them understand copyright in the context of research data, to help them make their research available to the world, and to help them understand what they can and cannot do with existing research data sets and the data sets that they have worked on themselves. Questions from researchers relating to research data and copyright are often complex, case-dependent, and nearly always involve multiple research partners with varying levels of responsibility and minimal expertise. Student researchers especially suffer from a lack of guidance, resources, and norms pertaining to questions of data sharing and reuse. International students may be especially affected, as they also must adapt to a new language, a new educational system, and different copyright and data sharing norms from those of their home countries. Early career faculty, postgraduate researchers, and research assistants quite often do not have the knowledge to help their students with questions about data ownership, rights, and obligations. To solve this problem, Oregon State University Libraries created the Data Sharing Wizard, a scenario-based active learning tool that offers an interactive approach to help researchers learn about copyright for research data sets. Using the wizard, researchers are able to identify appropriate documents, laws, and policies pertaining to the sharing and use of research data sets, who has a say in their use, and additional resources identified by librarians that can help answer specific questions. With those learning goals in mind, the authors designed a series of questions and answers structured around three overarching questions. What can I do with my data? What can others do with my data? And what can I do with other people's data?
Thanks, Michael. Now, I will talk about the wizard as an active learning tool, and then after that, a demonstration, and also talk about usability study. As Michael already mentioned, the wizard was designed as a software tool to support scenario-based learning, SBL, which is an active learning strategy that requires students to work through interactive scenarios that are built upon a real-world and a complex problem. SBL is optimal for teaching data sharing practice because it works best when student applies SBL to decision-making in complex situations, like how to select the appropriate way to disseminate dataset under different contexts. So next is a demonstration session, which we will show one video we made previously for the iPoster session in ACRL 2019. It's a general introduction of the wizard, but we also linked all three videos we made for ACRL 2019 in the slide. So you can refer them later when you have more time. Now it's demonstration, please.
In this video, I will show you the basic flow of the wizard. The first thing you need to do is to agree with this notice informing you that this tool is for educational purposes only. I agree. We have a header with the logo of the university and contact information so that people can send us questions. This header stays constant so that the contact information is always available. Check out other videos to learn more at the left navigation bar. I need to choose one of these three questions to start. Let's say that I'm thinking about publishing my data and I'm concerned about what other people will be able to do with it. I choose the middle one. What can other people do with my data? Is your data publicly available? Yes, I'm working with this scenario that my data is publicly available. Does your publicly available data have a license? I have not considered a license. I will open the link in a new tab to look at it later. But for now, I will explore what happens if the data is published without a license. Is my data under copyright? I happen to be familiar with copyright, and the answer is no. My data is a collection of facts, not covered by copyright. I can write the explanation to make sure that my understanding of copyright matches with the description. It looks like I've reached a final point. The explanation clarifies that my data set is publicly available and not protected by copyright. It's in the public domain, so other people can use, reuse, and redistribute the data set without having to ask my permission. It clarifies that in an academic context, attribution is expected, even if the data is in the public domain.
Thanks, Clara, for showing that video. Again, if you are interested, you can refer to the URL of the YouTube video. There are 3 of them for the entire introduction of the wizard. And now I will going to study in the section of usability study, which is an important part of the presentation as we will develop the usability study to answer the fundamental question that whether the wizard is effective as a learning tool. We have 2 assumptions, and the first assumption is after using the wizard, the student will be aware of concepts related to data use that they did not know before using the wizard. And the second assumption is if the student have misconceptions about data decision-making and the data use, the wizard will help them to detect these misconceptions and correct them. So we developed the entire usability study into 3 sessions. The entire session will last 6 minutes and each session lasting 20 minutes. So part 1, the participant will be asked answer survey questions without the help of the wizard or any other resources like a search engine. And in the second part, the participant will learn how to use the wizard after some introduction. And the part 3, the participant will answer the survey questions they have answered in part 1, but they must at this time using the wizard to find the best answers. We recruit 10 graduate students from Oregon State, and 4 of these students are self-claimed as international students. All the questions have open answers, and the participant has to type in their answers using computers. All the studies are taken on-site in late 2019, and each participant will receive a $15 gift card at the end of the session as an incentive for their time and effort. Here is an example we developed for the usability study. That is for scenario 3. The overall question is what I can do with other people's data. The scenario here describes Blake, who is a PhD student, and he finds a data set in a repository, and Blake wants to include the data set in the thesis dissertation, but is unsure about whether it's okay to do it or not. The repository where Blake finds the data does not include a clear license for the data. And the documentation about the data set does have the author names, but not author's contact information. So the question for the participants are, can Blake use the data for their dissertation? If yes, is there anything that Blake needs to do to use the data ethically? And if no, what Blake could do to gain permission to use the data? Now I will hand over the presentation to Clara for result analysis, please.
Thank you, Hui. So we used two types of analysis to review the answers of the usability study in a quantitative way. We have named these analyses relevant concept analysis and misconception analysis. The goal of the relevant concept analysis is to get a general sense about whether the answer is correct or not. We focused on what was right, and when in doubt, we were generous. The goal of the misconception analysis is to look at the details of each answer and detect the misconception's presence in the answers. When in doubt, we were picky. To use an analogy, with the relevant concept analysis, we were trying to look at the forest, and with the misconception analysis, we're trying to describe the leaves and branches in our forest. So let's start with the relevant concept analysis, our forest view. I'm going to keep the forest image on the top of the slides as a reference. For this analysis, we developed a rubric of concepts that would be correct and relevant for each scenario. There were 3 scenarios. Here you can see the rubric for scenario 3 as an example. A couple of things to take into account regarding these rubrics. First, as you saw, the scenarios are broad because they are meant to be similar to real-life situations. Scenario 3 is actually the most restrictive of the 3 scenarios. This means that the questions we posed to the participants can be answered from different points of view. So when we designed this rubric, we tried to be broad and include ideas that would be correct and appropriate, but not necessarily essential to answer the question. For example, take a look at concept number 4. If you remember the scenario, Blake was interested in a data set that was publicly available but had no license. Concept number 4 indicates that there are other places where the license or terms of use may be found. It is not an essential part of the answer, but it is correct and appropriate, so we included it. The results of this analysis should not be interpreted as a grade. They are useful to compare pre-wizard and post-wizard answers. An answer with more points will be a more complete answer. We coded all the responses from the 10 participants for the 3 scenarios. I will show you a summary of the answers in this table. In columns, you will see the integrated results of all answers for scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, and the total of all scenarios together. These are the average scores of the answers before using the wizard and after using the wizard. In this table, we're expressing these as percentages because the rubrics of each scenario have different number of concepts. But again, the important piece here is not the comparison between scenarios, but the comparison of pre and post wizard scores for each scenario. What this table is showing us here is that the scores after using the wizard are either very similar or lower than the scores before using the wizard. We believe that this is because the participants, when asked to answer the same question a second time, instead of rewriting everything again, they used what they had learned to complement or refine their previous answers. To check this theory, we calculated the combined score of the pre-wizard and post-wizard questionnaires, which was higher than the pre or post-wizard answers individually in all cases. And we also checked if there were new concepts mentioned in the post-wizard. The last line on this table shows the number, not the percentage, of new concepts that participants added in their post-wizard answers. The second analysis is what we call the misconception analysis, the one in which we take a close look at the leaves and branches of our forest. With this analysis, we wanted to scrutinize each response and identify all the misconceptions that the participants may have. We did that by breaking each answer in small concepts and then classifying each of these concepts as correct or not correct. Let me show you exactly what we did. This is an example of this breakdown in smaller concepts. These are two real responses from a participant for the questions regarding scenario 3. The first line is the answer that this participant wrote before using the wizard. As a reminder, the question was, can Blake use the data for their dissertation? We considered that there were 3 concepts in this response. 1, the concept that Blake needs to reach out to the authors. 2, the concept that Blake needs to reach to the article publishers. And 3, the concept that Blake needs to reach to these people to make sure that everything is okay. The second line is the response of the participant to the same question after using the wizard, and we followed the same process. And in this case, the participant provides 2 concepts. The next step would be to evaluate each concept and classify it as correct concept or as a misconception. I'll give you more details in a minute. One thing to take into account about this analysis is that the number of concepts varies in pre and post wizard answers. In this example, we have 3 concepts in the first line and 2 in the second line. Another issue that we encountered constantly was that the answers tended to be very short, and in many cases, it was hard to tell for sure if the concept was correct or a misconception. For example, in the first sentence, the participant said, to make sure everything is okay. Having read the question, we could interpret it as meaning to make sure that Blake can use the data. But it could also mean to make sure that the data is correct, which is a concept that several other participants expressed, that they could not trust that the data was correct unless the authors were contacted. Because of this ambiguity, we added 2 categories to the analysis, unclear and vague. We used unclear when we thought the response was probably a misconception, but we weren't sure, and vague when we thought the response was probably correct, but it may not. So here you have a list of the final categories. I've already discussed the categories correct and misconception. They are shown in the chart in green and blue respectively. I have also discussed the vague and clear categories, which are placed next to the category that we think they belong to, even if we're not sure. And there's a 5th category, correct, not appropriate, that we used when the participants discussed a concept that was correct, but that was not appropriate to the scenario. On the chart on the right, you can see the results for all scenarios together. The left column represents the classification of the concepts in the pre-wizard answers, and the right column represents the post-wizard answers. Misconceptions are at the bottom, correct concepts are at the top. The first thing to note is that the number of concepts in the pre-wizard answers is much higher than the number of concepts in the post-wizard answers. This fits with our theory that participants tended to refine their answers rather than rewrite everything. The second thing that we note is that the proportion of correct concepts is higher in post-wizard answers than in pre-wizard answers, a 74% versus a 54%, and that the proportion of misconceptions is lower post-wizard. The trend is the same even when we take into account the vague and unclear answers that we were not sure about. And it is also the same if we evaluate each scenario individually. These are the results for scenario 3 that show clearly less misconceptions and more correct concepts after using the wizard. So throughout all this process, we read all the answers several times, of course. We also paid attention to qualitative characteristics of the answers that were not captured by the previous analysis. In general, we found that the pose wizard answers often included better justifications of the same answer and included language that was more precise. So let's take a look at this example. The pre-wizard answer was, I think that Blake is able to use the data as long as it's openly shared, although I would be hesitant because of the unclear license for the data. Blake should use the author's names to find their contact information and request a clarification of the use of data and where to obtain a clear license for data use. And the pose wizard answer was, if the data set is not protected by copyright, regardless of if the license is clear or not, it seems that Blake will be able to use the data as it is publicly owned. Blake would need to make sure he cites the data carefully throughout his work so as not to defame ownership. The first thing that we notice is that even though the participant has the same answer pre and post wizard, the reasoning about why is more precise after using the wizard. We can also see that this participant is using more specific language. They are referring to copyright. Many of the post wizard answers had language like copyright, fair use, public domain, etc. that was not present in the pre-wizard answers. Finally, it's noteworthy that in this particular answer, there's a completely new concept added, the concept that the data needs to be cited. And that's the end of my part. Do you want to take it over?
Thank you, Clara. Libraries may, of course, point users to the wizard as it is freely available online. If you do wish to customize it for your own use, the source code is available at GitHub under a new GPL 3.0 license at the URL you see on your screen. To customize the wizard, there are 3 basic steps. You'll need to prepare the data using the database.json file, customize the JavaScript and CSS programs, and deploy the application to your server. There is a README file in our GitHub repository that includes specific instructions. In conclusion, the results suggest that the wizard is an effective tool for active learning. The participants added relevant information to their responses after using the wizard, and they had fewer misconceptions after using it. The usability does have some limitations. As Clara mentioned, participants were not motivated to type long answers to survey questions, and the post-wizard answers seemed to be a refinement of the pre-wizard answers, which complicated the interpretation of the results. It's worth noting the conditions under which the wizard was tested are different than the environment under which we are envisioning its use. We are very excited about using the wizard in the classroom. As soon as OSU's spring term, Clara is going to use the wizard in her data management course. We'd like to thank you for joining us and encourage you to contact us with any questions. Thank you very much.